PC ports always seem to be a bit of a risky business for consumers. For the most part, there's just no telling which ones will be solid and which ones will be a complete mess. Platinum Games seems to know this, and they've certainly put their best foot forward this year. Their re-release of Bayonetta is a solid example of a good port and a fantastic game. Furthermore, my time with Vanquish has shown that it is also up to par with some of this year's new releases. Vanquish is a third-person cover-based shooter where you take on the role of a DARPA operative who is tasked with shutting down Russia's newest evil plot. So right off the bat, the story sounds pretty generic, and that's probably because it is. While it's not bad, it's definitely not very interesting, but it does a really good job of moving the game along. I wasn't all too disappointed due to lack of story, because going in, I kind of expected that. I wasn't going to Vanquish for the story, I was going for its gameplay. I've always really enjoyed third-person shooters, and I missed out on this one back on Xbox 360. I had forgotten about its existence, but when it was announced to be coming to PC, I was pretty excited. The gameplay felt fluid right out of the gate, the controls are tight, and the movement is beyond smooth. Firing at enemies while sliding around passing in and out of slow motion sounds like a lot, but in Vanquish it all feels like one smooth stroke. There isn't a lot of enemy variety, but they all execute different maneuvers, which was enough to keep me on my toes. Thanks to this, none of the combat felt monotonous, even when I was just unloading into a boss. There's also lots of weapon variety that complements the fluidity and difficulty of combat. You've got anything between your generic assault rifle to things like disc launchers or lock-on lasers. There's also an upgrade system in place that certainly feels like it makes a difference. Upgrades are dropped by enemies at times during battle, and picking them up is as simple as pressing R. It's a seamless feature that doesn't have the player going into a different menu or anything like that. At times I just slide through enemies, firing as I go, and I'd pick one up without bothering to let up on the trigger. Make no mistake though, you can't just run around all willy-nilly without regard for the enemy. The game will punish you if you get overconfident, and I definitely felt that when I first started out. Vanquish runs on a checkpoint system, so if you die, you get set back a bit. It's never an absurd amount of time lost, but it is enough to make you think twice before running into a horde of enemies. I put on the normal difficulty and it was a nice sweet spot for me. Things could get tough, but never too hard. At the time of playing though, there was a glitch where damage seemed to be locked to your frame rate. So if you had a higher frame rate, you'd take more damage than if you were running it at the standard 30 FPS. It didn't really affect my experience though, and I never really noticed it until it was pointed out to me. I honestly just thought it was part of the difficulty of the game. So since I mentioned frame rate, let's talk performance. Overall, it ran really well. I didn't have any frame dips or any other graphical issues. It should be noted that I'm playing on the highest settings of the GTX 1070. There are also lots of other options to tweak in the settings menu for people with different hardware. Fundamentally as a game though, there were a few times where things felt a bit glitchy. For example, in one mission, one of the Marines that was working with me just started saying the same things over and over again. It was really obnoxious, but that portion of the mission was really short, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Also, sometimes the ability to progress seemed to be linked to the position of your friendly units. This resulted in waiting a few seconds to a minute for them to get into their proper places. These are really small inconveniences that I felt were worth mentioning, but ultimately I'm more than willing to look past them. Vanquish may be almost 7 years old, but it still looks and sounds great. Even though the game is full of darker and grittier colors, everything still looks vibrant. The guns sound powerful and distinct, and the soundtrack is pretty badass. The voice acting isn't anything to write home about, but I feel the generic writing didn't really give it a chance to stand out. Overall, Vanquish is a very fun, albeit short title. It took me around 4 hours to complete it, but man, those 4 hours were certainly entertaining. Its fluid movement and combat coupled with solid level design made it a real treat. Not only that, there are very few breaks in the action throughout my entire playthrough. My experience was not at all inhibited by load times or anything of that nature. From the moment I hit play, I could have just sat there and played through the whole game without a hitch, and that is an amazing feeling. Platinum Games is quickly becoming one of my favorite game dev studios, and with the titles they release, that shouldn't come as a surprise. I've heard people say, if you like Bayonetta, then you'll probably like Vanquish. And at first I thought it was because Vanquish seems to have the same obsession with slow motion that Bayonetta does. However, I've come to realize that the reason is that Vanquish, just like other Platinum Games titles, is really a great game in its own right. For more reviews on video games and hardware alike, as well as first looks, editorials, and build guides, be sure to head over to KBMOD.com.